If you recognize the tune, the words are all new. Now let me tell you a story about a man named Pete, a poor newsman just trying to make ends meet. He went to Holy Cross to learn himself to ride. The next thing you know, his career's taken flight. Multimedia, that is, the WBJ and main biz. The next thing you know, old Pete's a millionaire. His kinfolk said, Pete, move away from there. They said, Beantown is the place you ought to be. But Pete loves Worcester, so he's here with you and me. Scrambled eggs, economists, and forecasts. Peter Stanton, ladies and gentlemen, that's him. All right, there you go. All right, now,